dual adjustability.
About emails getting hacked going back to the 2016 campaign. And in the category of you can't make this stuff up, after getting attacked on Twitter by his boss, the president, and after standing up for himself today, tonight, Attorney General Jeff Sessions shows up to dinner in Washington with his deputy, Mr. Rosenstein, who happens to be in charge of the Mueller investigation. The 11th hour on a Wednesday night begins now. Well, good evening once again from our NBC News headquarters here in New York. Day 405 of the Trump administration, and it will take us all of this next hour just to tell you what has happened this evening. There are major developments on several fronts. Here's a look at the headlines from, again, just the last several hours. NBC News has learned exclusively that Robert Mueller is asking witnesses if Mr. Trump had advance knowledge about emails stolen from the DNC and the Clinton campaign. That reporting comes from our own colleagues Katie Tur and Carol Lee. The Washington Post reporting tonight Mueller is also looking at Trump's apparent efforts to oust Attorney General Jeff Sessions from his post. Just today, the president said his own Attorney General was disgraceful. And then tonight, the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, the very man, shows up in a very public, high-end D.C. restaurant, and he brings along a very special guest. Axios describes it this way: a show of solidarity with Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who is overseeing the Mueller investigation. Then late this evening, the New York Times is on the board with reporting that Jared Kushner's family real estate business received hundreds of millions of dollars in loans from Citigroup and Apollo Global Management after those two companies' leaders met with Kushner at the White House. We'll have more, again, on each of these stories as we span across the next hour. We will begin, however, with a big change involving the president's inner circle. Hope Hicks, easily the closest aide to this president on a daily basis, has announced she is leaving. Word of her departure in a story broken by Maggie Haberman of the New York Times comes one day after Hope Hicks spent just over 9 hours under questioning by the House Intelligence Committee. Among the things she told the panel, she sometimes, quote, told white lies for the president, except where Russia or the investigation were concerned. That's according to committee member Congressman Peter King, Republican of New York. Hope Hicks is 29 years old. She is the 5th person to hold the title of Communications Director in just over a year for this White House. She goes back to the start of the campaign. She was there on every flight, at every stop with Donald Trump. A photo posted to Instagram by Trump aide Dan Scavino indicates just how essential she has been to Donald Trump. That photo was taken on board the helicopter Marine One. That's Mr. Porter in the seat opposite her, the former staff secretary at the White House. Hope Hicks flying with the president. And when he was running for the president...
Out today, one day after her appearance before House Intel yesterday. What's your read on this?
Well, I'm not sure the reason she's out. Obviously, it's been a rough time for her. I've read the explanation that she was contemplating this for a while, the stress issue, all that. But also the fact that she was read the riot act by her boss, and it triggered... could well, as was said in the last segment, to have triggered the departure.
So you and John have both, Jack, you and John have both been White House counsel. So how does this work? Is it routine that anyone testifying on the Hill or before Mueller or the Mueller team comes back to the White House and then debriefs the White House?
Well, you know, when Ken Starr interviewed people, ordinarily they would have their own lawyers, but the president's lawyers would communicate with those lawyers because we had, you know, a client that had something in common. In our case, you know, we had the president had outside lawyers representing him in his personal capacity, and we were there to represent him in his capacity as president, or in other words, to represent the office of the president and protect, as best we could, the prerogatives of the presidency.
Mm. So John, Hicks was a key figure on the Air Force One in that trip when the president and his aides drafted that misleading statement about Don Jr., Jared and Steve Bannon's meeting with all those Russians. He refused to answer questions about that yesterday. Does her departure mean that she will have to be more forthcoming about her role in the White House, or no?
It could well. Executive privilege is not really a legal privilege. It's more political than it is legal. There have been legal enforcements of it, but for example, when Nixon refused to turn his tapes over to Congress, Congress never got the tapes. Only the courts got them with the Supreme Court decision based on executive privilege. So Hope Hicks is in a situation where so long as she wants to claim it, she could probably get away with it. But if she doesn't want to claim it, there's no way that Trump can enforce her to say, I invoke executive privilege, particularly now that she doesn't work for him.
Yeah.
I would add simply that if the Congress stands up for itself, it can force the issue. There were
With
occasions.
contempt.
I'm sorry?
With contempt.
Yes, absolutely. Congress moved to hold people in our White House, myself included, in contempt. Now, it never came to that, and it was a bargaining chip, if you will. But yes, Congress has the ability to do that, to force the issue. They're not going to do it here. So in this circumstance, you're quite right. But one of the things that's abundantly clear is that Mr. Mueller is not going to roll over the way the Congress will. The Congress is not standing up for its constitutional prerogatives. That much is clear. But Bob Mueller, I think, is not in any way, shape, or form going to accept the idea that an individual who is not the president, by the way, asserts executive privilege because he or she has been told by someone at the White House to do so. The executive privilege is the privilege of only one person in this country, and that's the president. He has to invoke it, not any of his aides.
So, John, look, tonight, the Washington Post is reporting that Robert Mueller is investigating President Trump's apparent effort to oust the Attorney General Jeff Sessions last July. Why does that interest Mueller?
Well, it's, again, not unlike the Comey firing. It could raise the possibility of obstruction of justice. What was his intent when he was doing this? While he has the constitutional power to remove anybody who's serving at his pleasure, and all of his cabinet members do, if he does it with the intent to defeat an investigation by a special counsel, that raises a whole separate issue of whether he's doing so to obstruct justice.
Paul Manafort was in court again today, pleading not guilty to fresh allegations of money laundering, conspiracy, making false statements about his foreign lobbying. The charges are piling up here, really. What do you think Manafort's strategy is to get out of the trouble that he's in? Let's see, Jack, what do you think?
Paul Manafort's got three pathways, okay? He can go to trial. I certainly wouldn't take that on a contingency fee. He can hold out and hope that he gets a pardon. I think that a pardon is becoming increasingly dangerous for the president, and he's unlikely to see it happen.
Why is that dangerous? Why is that becoming increasingly dangerous?
Well, it goes to the point John just made. It could be evidence of the president's intent in connection with an obstruction case.
Got it.
So I would think that the president's personal counsel would advise him not to do that because it does add to this pile of evidence on that matter. And then, you know, the third choice, of course, is to plea. And I think, in fact, that the most likely thing here, and what clearly the special counsel is driving toward, is putting sufficient pressure on Paul Manafort that he will plead to some of the charges against him, as did his longtime assistant Rick Gates, who, by the way, got, you know, a very generous deal. And as you suggested, the charges against Paul Manafort, when you put the charges pending in the District of Columbia and Alexandria, Virginia together, I think they're in the mid-20s already.
Wow.
So he's facing the rest of his natural life in prison unless he makes a deal with the special counsel.
What do you think Manafort's strategy is to get out of trouble, the trouble he's in, John?
Well, I can't be sure at this stage. Some speculation has been that he's more afraid of the Russians and Ukrainians at this point than he is of going to jail for the rest of his life. So who knows what's motivating him totally. His wife is with him still. We know from the extensive number of texts that he lost between his daughters a lot about his frame of mind. He's actually threatened to commit suicide in the past over his marriage. So I have no idea how to get into his mind or what his strategy could be. The simplest solution and the honorable thing to do at this point would be to turn himself in and say, here's what I know.
Tell the truth, yeah. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jack. I appreciate it.
Sure.
When we come back, the president meeting with lawmakers about guns today, shocking pretty much everyone by seeming to embrace some of the same policies President Obama put forward. So, will new laws actually be passed? I'm going to ask the Congresswoman who represents Sandy Hook, Connecticut. She attended that meeting today.
You know that
one of President Trump's closest aides, Hope Hicks, coming just one day after she admitted she told lies that she characterized as white lies, but lies nonetheless, in the service of President Trump, she says. A source telling CNN's Aaron Burnett that Trump berated Hicks for admitting she'd lied and asked her how she could be so stupid. And it's hardly the only sign of chaos in this White House. A source says the president's top advisor and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, feels everyone is out to get him after losing his top secret security clearance in the middle of his pitched battle with Chief of Staff John Kelly. Plus, President Trump holds a live televised meeting on guns with Republicans and Democrats and ends up sounding an awful lot like a Democrat, calling for a ban on bump stocks, strengthening background checks, and raising the age of gun purchases from 18 to 21, and shockingly saying this.
Take the firearms first and then go to court. A lot of times, by the time you go to court, it takes so long to go to court to get the due process procedures. I like taking the guns early.
So let's discuss as much as we can in the time that we have. I want to bring in now CNN political commentator Scott Jennings and Amanda Carpenter. Good evening to both of you. Scott, you first. What do you think the real reason? What do you think the real reason or reasons are behind Hope Hicks announcing her resignation?
Well, I feel bad for Hope Hicks because she's had a heck of a few weeks. The Porter scandal that hit the White House was hard on her, and then obviously she had to go testify before Congress. These jobs are very hard. She's been in the White House for over a year. She was on the campaign. She's had a pretty grueling experience for the last 3 years, really. And so eventually fatigue and anxiety and stress catches up with everybody in these high-level positions. So I suspect it was some combination of that finally convinced her maybe it was time to do something else.
Yeah, but why do you feel bad? I mean, she signed up for it. I mean, listen, you get a lot of criticism. I get a lot of criticism. We get through this is what we signed up for. But, I mean, do you think the reason is that she had a lot of stress? That's the reason for her resignation?
Well, I think she's been functioning in a high-stress environment, not for 1 year, but for 3 years when you add the campaign in. Look, I've been there. What she did before Congress in that committee is not easy, and it's very stressful. Being under investigation, being part of an investigation, that's a high-anxiety lifestyle on top of the high stress that your job already carries. So I'm not surprised that people aren't going to last all 4 years in this first term when you're living with that much mental anxiety.
Amanda, I want to bring in and get your response to this. Because when you hear CNN's reporting that President Trump berated her yesterday for admitting to House investigators that she sometimes tells white lies for the president, I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, let's connect some dots here. Yes, the stress could have caught up to her, or, the lies did. We know that she told America that there was no communication between the Trump campaign and any foreign entities, i.e. the Russians, during the campaign. She was interviewed by congressional investigators and Mueller about campaign contacts with Russia. That's, part of what this whole investigation was about. 9 hours yesterday. And then suddenly there's a news report that says Hope Hicks sometimes tells white lies. Then Trump berates her for going to the press and letting it be known that, yes, she admitted to telling white lies. What was she probably telling white lies about, which I don't think is a white lie at all, but rather a giant, steaming, massive lie about Russia. So all of a sudden, in a very short amount of time, she's in a very difficult place where her boss wants her to effectively continue lying to investigators about Russian contacts or, potentially going to jail. and then poof, she leaves. You know, I think that's pretty clearly what happened. We'll need more reporting to bear it out, but if you want to connect the dots there, you can just get a marker out and draw them.
Hey, Scott, how big of a blow is this to her resignation to the president, who relies on her so much and an ever-shrinking inner circle now? It seems like the only people left he really trusts in the White House are his family.
Yeah, I think it's a big blow. I think the other person that he relied on a lot was his former body man, Schiller, who resigned a few months ago. Now Hope Hicks is leaving in the next few weeks. There really aren't that many people left in the White House that I think the president brought in from the campaign that he really feels close to. And so we'll have to see how this next round of advisors that the president may not have as close a personal connection with end up functioning with him interpersonally. We can see today that he's having some issues with other people like Jeff Sessions. He tends to get upset with advisors that he doesn't have that close personal connection with. So I'm fearful that the White House may feel a little more chaotic without some of the stabilizing influence that Hope Hicks brought, I think, to the president's mind every day.
Even more chaotic, right? So, Amanda, just look at all the breaking news stories, and that's why I said more chaotic. This is just in the last 48 hours. Just to name a few, there's Hope Hicks, the resignation, the Javanka Kelly feud, Trump attacking Sessions, Kushner being stripped of his top secret clearance, the Post story that 4 countries are looking at ways to manipulate Kushner, Admiral Mike Rogers saying that he isn't getting the authority from the president needed to disrupt Russia's attempts to interfere in our elections. And that's just a partial list.
Yeah, and then you can throw out the gun legislation meeting today, which was a total mess. I mean, I watched that and I kind of stepped away and said, okay, if you're a Republican senator in a red state, like even, you know, my former boss, Ted Cruz, Trump is effectively asking you to choose between him and the NRA when it comes to many of these upcoming discussions. Trump was all over the place. And what was really disappointing to me is that I think there's a lot of traction in conservative circles for these gun violence protection orders where a family member could report someone to the authorities and say, listen, he's a threat to himself and others. Can you take his guns away? And then have a due process element so that that person can go to court and have a fair hearing. And then Trump trashed that all over the place and essentially was saying, well, let's just take the weapons. You know, this is, I mean, and that's just one thing aside from all his internal conflicts and, you know, what you mentioned yesterday with people asking for help in regards to Russia meddling in future elections. And so, yeah, things are spiraling out of control. I would hope that members of Congress could be a steadying force. But by all appearances, everyone's in duck and cover mode.
Yeah, Amanda, Scott, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thanks.
I want to bring in now Mr. Fareed Zakaria, the host of CNN's Fareed Zakaria GPS. Good evening. You just heard me read off the list of these huge news stories, and that's not all of them. These are self-inflicted wounds. I know the White House and folks like to say, oh, this is fake news, we're reporting it, but everything that we've reported on has had a consequence. Jared Kushner's security clearance, you know, Kelly and downgrading and changing the way security clearances are given. Hope Hicks and her relationship with Rob Porter and, you know, what she said to the committee, white lies. Now she's resigning. What do you think of all this?
Well, it's always been clear to me that Donald Trump was not a particularly good manager. I mean, you could argue that he was a very good salesman, he's a very good brand builder, but he'd never really run anything of any size and scale. The Trump organization is, you know, as far as one can tell, 50 people, most of whom report to him in a very chaotic, haphazard manner. It's a court with a lot of trust and old relationships and buried secrets. Look at his lawyer, Michael Cohen, who's willing to claim that he spent $130,000 of his own money to pay off, you know, a certain woman. That does not translate well to the federal government, which is a very large, institutionalized, rule-based system. And you know what you see in all these cases is the institutions being disregarded, the rules, the processes being flouted. And the theory was, well, we're different, we can do all that. But as you say, it's all had consequences. Look, we have another really stunning report out about Jared Kushner and loans made to the Kushner company after meeting with people in the White House. And the central issue there was every president in the modern era has taken great pains to separate themselves from their businesses such as they existed. And it's not true that no president had a business before. Herbert Hoover was a very successful businessman. George W. Bush had a business. But all of them cordoned it off. Here you have the totally bizarre situation where the president and his closest aides are owning and largely operating businesses while simultaneously being, running the White House.
Even Jimmy Carter divested himself of his business.
Exactly.
I'm going to get back more to Jared Kushner, but just quickly, because I want to move on. Hope Hicks, what do you think of her resignation?
It's exactly as you said. I think this was the one person who, I think she may be the last person who comes from the original group who actually predates the campaign. So there's probably a lot of trust, a great deep personal relationship. Why she chose this moment to resign, I think none of us know, but it clearly, when you compound it with all the things that you talked about, it's a bad week. It's a sign of a certain degree of chaos and a lack of discipline. And I would add to the list you mentioned, by the way, the fact that Trump is now openly at war with his own attorney general is a particular, again, there's so many of these things we say. The word unprecedented is now losing all meaning.
Admiral Rogers yesterday saying it is,
in the Trump administration, because every day we have another unprecedented event.
Let's put the last graph back up of people. These are the really the original. Hope Hicks was there, and Keith Schiller. They were the real originals, and then, of course, Ivanka Trump, and then much longer than Jared after he married her. But those were really the original three right there.
Right. She comes out of the real estate business. She
right.
knows him before even he was a candidate. So.
Right. And then Steve Bannon and Michael Flynn, they came on, but then, and Dan Scavino was a communications person, or the online media person, whatever. And then Kellyanne Conway came in late, almost towards the end of the thing. So she was there really from the beginning, almost like a child. So,
and sometimes, what happens when administrations face crises, what you tend to see is a hunkering down to the core associates, to the old soulmates. Here, what's happening is the opposite. What's happening is those people are all leaving, and what you're left with are people with whom Trump has no real relationship. McMaster, Kelly, these are not people Donald Trump probably trusts deeply, and you can see that even with Sessions, who was his earliest political ally.
Right.
But clearly, there's no personal trust.
Right.
So it must be a tough time for Donald Trump.
I'm not sure about Scavino. May go back longer than I said there. But listen, I want to get your reaction. This is a Post story. It's about Jared Kushner's security clearance and how 4 countries, China, Mexico, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, were discussing ways to exploit his vulnerabilities, his business debt, his lack of political experience. What do you make of this? What's the end game here, you think?
So I think it's important to understand all governments are always trying to influence and manipulate key figures in the White House. So that's not new. And those particular 4, it strikes me as perfectly plausible they were doing that. And people do that all the time. They try to identify ways to kind of do end runs around the bureaucracy and get to the president. Again, the difference here is because the president and Jared Kushner and the family of the president, as it were, have not really distanced themselves from their business activities, have not created an Chinese wall, have not created a kind of real separation. There is this opportunity to engage in this kind of, essentially bribery. Look, I have a Chinese friend who said, I know what the Chinese government is going to do. He said they do this with the Vietnamese, they do this with the Filipinos, they do it with the Malaysians. We basically, we've found clever ways to bribe politicians. He said, I just never thought I'd see them able to do this with the President of the United States. Yeah. That's the difference.
In terms of exploiting Kushner's vulnerabilities, I mean, it's particularly interesting, but I mean, Israel, one of those countries, because I remember Netanyahu family, friends with Jared Kushner's family, Netanyahu even slept on Jared's bed. I mean, Israel is trying to exploit his vulnerabilities, and he's good friends with it.
Look, the Israelis are trying to pursue their national interest as aggressively as they can, and nobody should fault them for that. Nobody should fault the Mexicans or the Chinese. The problem is, again, why do you have this vulnerability? Why not do what every modern president has done, which is to not simultaneously be, the Philippine ambassador to America is Donald Trump's business partner. So you have a guy in Washington who's writing checks to Donald Trump. I mean, how could that not be seen as a problem?
Because I think Congress or people won't.
Well, there are no. The president has this very special status in the American system, which is why great presidents have always been defined by the restraint. I mean, it's from George Washington down. The point
in a fair and impartial manner. And I want to talk about this now with Joel Brunner. He is a former Inspector General for the National Security Agency under President George W. Bush. Mr. Brunner, it's an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for coming on. We're seeing President Trump once again publicly shame his own attorney general, and Jeff Sessions fighting back more than he ever has in the past. First, why do you think Sessions is pushing back so strongly on this one now?
I think Jeff Sessions knows that his public career at some point is going to be over. And he wants to go home to Alabama and be able to look in the mirror and say to himself that I kept my integrity in very difficult circumstances. Jeff Sessions did the right thing. Inspector generals were created for exactly situations like this. We got them in the civilian part of our government after Watergate in the late 70s because the Congress wanted independent officials within the executive branch who could examine the possibility of wrongdoing, alleged wrongdoing. We've now got serious allegations. I'm not really impressed with their merit, but we have serious allegations relating to the FBI's behavior before the FISA court. The FBI is part of the Justice Department. The fact that the president is upset that Sessions is playing by the book is yet another indication that the president is profoundly ignorant and indifferent to the purposes of the institutions of our government. It's astonishing.
Yeah, you're the former NSA Inspector General. An Inspector General, right? I think that's what you're saying. This is the right person to investigate this, correct?
Exactly the right sort of person to investigate it. IGs, as we call them, are in charge of internal investigations and internal program audits in various departments of government, and just about all of our departments of government right now. So when Sessions looks at the landscape here and sees the politicization of our intelligence committees on the Hill, especially in the House, and he says, I've got a mechanism here to resolve this. It's the IG. If I do it as a political appointment of the president, we're not going to get out of this political tangle. So he's looking for an official who can do the job in a credible way. And when the president attacks that institution because the IG is not his man, then we're really in difficult straits when the president is one after another attacking the institutions of American government. He attacked the courts because he didn't like the ethnic background of a judge. He attacks the intelligence agencies because they present him facts that he doesn't like. He's now attacked the FBI because he can't control the FBI. And he's attacking the IG because he didn't appoint the guy. That's the point. We have institutions in our government that act independently. That's what limited government is about.
Yeah, and not one of those institutions he attacks quite frequently is the press as well. So he does attack pretty much every established institution we have. Joe, I've got to ask you this though before we run out of time. Do you think that President is trying to force the Attorney General to quit rather than fire him because he's concerned about the optics of it?
That's hard to say. I have to think that the president's been advised that firing Sessions right now would create a firestorm on the Hill, even among people in his own party. And Sessions, I think, realizes that he is a bulwark now between the president and Robert Mueller, who's been another a target of the president's attacks, one of the most respected people in public service in our time. So I think Sessions is he's hardly flinching under repeated nasty personal attacks, but I think he's there now to do a job, and we'll just have to see how that plays out. I'm not privy to his private thoughts.
Yeah. Joel Brenner, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
When we come back, much more on Hope Hicks' resignation and the curious timing of it. Plus, the New York Times reporting that Jared Kushner's company received money from businesses after he met with them in the White House. Is there a connection to him losing his security clearance? Departures from the Trump White House in a little over a year. Let's discuss now. CNN national security analyst Samantha Vinograd, a former senior advisor to the national security advisor under President Obama, and Rick Wilson, a Republican strategist. Good evening to both of you. Rick, you've got a little saying that everything Trump touches dies. Is that what happened here with Hope Hicks?
Absolutely. The rule always applies. The rule always, ends up obtaining no matter who they are or what they think their position is or how solid it looks. At some point, the compromises and the trouble that Trump brings people ends up destroying their career. I mean, it's like a game show where you get high legal bills, your personal reputation destroyed, and other than that, the lovely parting gift is national headlines about the fact that you've been booted out of the White House. It's a real mess for her, but this White House is firing people at a rate that is quite astounding. And it doesn't seem to be changing, and it always comes down to the fact that these folks are defending Trump or helping Trump or trying to push his agenda, and they always end up under the wheels of the passing train.
Sam, here's what you say. The timing of Hope Hicks' resignation is a prime example of the Trump administration's crisis strategy. How so?
It feels like every time the White House is under pressure, we have all this reporting about Jared Kushner's foreign business conflicts, undisclosed or misreported meetings. Another shoe drops. We have Hope Hicks resigning last weekend in the middle of all the scrutiny on Jared Kushner's clearance. All of a sudden, the Schiff memo comes out. Donald Trump launches into a Twitter storm. And we talked about that instead of all of the policy issues that actually mattered. So it feels like a little bit too much of a cute coincidence. But, one point I'll make, everything that Trump touches dies, except Jared Kushner. The least qualified person to be running policy right now in the White House is still there. So I wish that Kushner would be pushed out of the White House and would resign, and we'd have this kind of crisis communications to deal with. Instead, he's still there working on these really heavy issues.
Interesting. Well, Rick, yesterday is about, I guess, 20 breaking news stories ago, but you wrote in the Daily Beast, right. You said the deep state takes out the White House's dark clown prince. And you really pulled no punches talking about Jared Kushner's loss of a security clearance and how it's tied to his fortune and, more importantly, his debts. Now tonight we're learning he met with top Wall Street execs in the White House who then lent his business money.
Sure. I mean, look, any other human being on earth would be in prison by now because of all this. Jared Kushner is so compromised and so compromisable. And then the article I wrote in the Daily Beast yesterday basically ran through the fact that American intelligence was listening in while foreign nations were basically astounded at how easy it would be to bribe and manipulate this guy. And the fact of the matter is the president, he's listening to Ivanka saying, but Daddy, keep him here. That is unacceptable for a president to do. The nepotism problem would be a problem no matter what, if he didn't have any investments or anything else. But this is a guy who has basically been trying to sell himself and sell his influence in the White House in order to fund 666 Fifth Avenue, this white elephant building his family is invested in New York. And this is a guy who is the president has given him this vast portfolio of assignments and opportunities to influence American foreign and domestic policy. And the problem is he is utterly corrupt. He doesn't need to be in the White House. The guy's probably going to end up spending more time in a federal correctional facility than the White House at the end of the day, because it's so obvious how cheaply he was trying to sell himself to anyone who walked in the door. Yeah. I mean, this is a guy who might as well have a for sale sign tattooed on his neck.
Well, you talked about, would you say it was a Daily Beast you read the piece? Because Sam has a very similar article, which is in Politico. And Sam, you wrote, foreign governments are always looking for potential intelligence targets. They look to recent assets that have access to information that they need and influence over policy. They look for assets which, with manipulation points, adding that the final element that makes the perfect foreign intelligence target, inexperience. You say Jared checks every single box.
Most definitely. I mean, whether it was hubris, inexperience, or Kushner was pursuing some other agenda, he made every national security mistake in the book. He was unprepared for meetings. He reportedly didn't work with the White House National Security Council. Typically, when you go and meet with the Chinese, you bring a friend, you bring someone to take notes, you bring a translator so that there's some other readout of the meeting. And you also debrief everyone when you get out so that there's an official record for the U.S. government and you're not, again, relying on a foreign country to tell everyone what actually happened. And so Jared Kushner's not special in many ways. It was a powerful figure that would have been targeted by a foreign intelligence service, but this hubris aspect makes him very different.
Hey, Rick, quickly here, because I got to get to the break. Jared, he's among dozens of aides who lost their top security clearance. Is this a sign, despite the president being mad, that actually Kelly is winning the knife fight that's underway now at the White House?
It definitely is. Reducing Jared from a top secret SCI clearance to Walmart greeter clearance in the space of a couple of days has shown that John Kelly has some control and some hand in this White House. You know, that may not last, but he's certainly doing his best to try to eliminate the possibility of Jared, you know, putting up the President's Daily Brief for sale on the dark web somewhere.
Housewares on aisle 4 to the back and the right. Thank you. I appreciate it. When we come back with Hope Hicks planning to leave the White House, is the president losing all of his inner circle, his most trusted aides, and should he be worried? We had lies for the president. Mark McKinnon is here. Let's discuss. He's a former advisor to George W. Bush and John McCain, who is executive producer of The Circus. Good to see you, sir. So, Mark, on most days, the president sitting down with lawmakers for a televised bipartisan meeting would be front page news. Instead, the White House is dealing with headlines like Trump calls Sessions handling of surveillance abuse, allegations disgraceful, Mueller investigation examining Trump's apparent efforts to oust Sessions in July, Jared Kushner's ties to banks under scrutiny. The White House denies Trump berated Hope Hicks. I mean, look at all this. We have those headlines up on the screen there. I mean, that's just from the last few hours. How can this White House get anything done?
Well, it's dizzying, Don, and as you know, this isn't just today. This is every day, and I had to talk to your producers this morning, as I do every week, and we talk about what we're probably going to talk about tonight, and then sure enough, by late afternoon, it's a completely different set of issues. You know, working in the White House, I call it the human microwave, under normal circumstances. And so I just want to echo something that Maggie Haberman just tweeted out, which is that the surprise should not be that anybody's leaving. The surprise is that anybody's staying. But in this case, Hope Hicks, obviously, it is a big deal for everybody because, for a lot of reasons. I mean, one is that she's so close to Trump. Two, everybody assumed that she'd be there for most of the ride anyway. And that she and his former personal assistant, Keith Schiller, were such security blankets for him that people are worried what's going to happen in a pretty chaotic White House and executive with them there, what it's going to be like without them there. And so Hope Hicks is an interesting person, and particularly intriguing to those of us in the communications business as a communications director who, in a couple of years of a campaign, and more than a year as communications director in some capacity at the White House, has been seen on camera once, which I commend. You know, she facilitated press but tried to stay out of it. But as we saw in the last couple of weeks, she's suddenly in the hot glare of the spotlight, and I don't think she liked it a bit.
Yeah, and if you've met her, like I said in the beginning of the show, I only met her once. Could not be nicer, but I mean, she was, you know, really in the mixer there, in the grinder. But listen, our Pamela Brown has been reporting that the president has made clear that he needs Jared and Ivanka to stay on board since they're the only ones he feels that he can trust. The president has publicly criticized McMaster, Sessions, Tillerson, and reportedly berated Hope Hicks, arguably one of the most loyal foot soldiers. Do you think Trump's loyalty, which seems only to extend to his family, do you think that's going to hurt him?
Yeah, I think it already has, and I think you know, I'm not one of those who says that nobody connected to a family should work for a president under any circumstances. I think there are circumstances, although in the Bush administrations, in 8 years of George W. and 4 years of George H.W., I'm not aware of a single family member that worked in any capacity. Now, there may be some that I'm just not aware of, but if they were, it was certainly low level, not a high security, you know, special assistant to the president without portfolio. The problem with that is that even if there is no conflict of interest, there's always going to be the appearance of that. And we saw that with Jared Kushner today, where he gets a couple of loans from large corporate interests who have been at the White House in meetings with him. So how can there not be at least the appearance of a conflict? And when you're president and you're trying to get stuff done, you don't even want the appearance of that. So you know, how there's an agenda now with this kind of chaos for this year. I don't think it's going to be much of one through the midterms.
Yeah. Wow. Well, the president punted to John Kelly to deal with the security clearance problem in the wake of Rob Porter, and Kelly promptly downgraded Kushner's clearance. Do you think that it's going to end up hurting him with the president?
I hope not. I mean, I think that a lot of people believe that even those who become skeptical that John Kelly's presence is a good presence there because he is concerned about those kind of conflicts, although he didn't raise it as early as he should have. But I think from the beginning, he's been concerned about the relationship of the family with Trump in the White House.
Yeah.
I think those are the kind of conflicts that that as a military guy, he just instinctively got. So I think it's going to be an ongoing problem until it's resolved one way or the other, until their roles are either diminished or exported, or Kelly goes.
Listen, I always ask you questions that I want to, but I want to know what questions do you have? What's important to you? Is there something that we're missing here? Because there's so many stories. What's on your mind tonight?
Well, what's on my mind is ramping up the circus here in a couple of weeks with 18 new episodes in season 3, and how we're going to cover this. You like that segue?
I do. I like that shameless self-promotion, but go on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But it just reminds me that there are so many sort of arrows coming at us every day that what we fail to understand, I think, because it's so scattershot and so asymmetric, what is the bigger picture of the Mueller investigation, for example? We don't know, but we get so drawn into all these other things. So my questions are kind of, what's the bigger picture for the presidency, for the executive, for the country long term, and are these guardrails of democracy going to hold up over time?
You can't go live on Showtime, can you? Because you may have to end up doing that this season.
Yeah, no, I mean, we keep changing. I mean, the executives see the show Sunday morning and it goes on Sunday night, and oftentimes we're changing stuff late Saturday night, given this administration, how much happens.
When does the new season start again?
April 15th. Thanks for asking.
We'll see you then. Thank you, Mark McKinnon. Always a pleasure.
All right,
thank you so much. When we come back, the President and his Attorney General publicly feuding over the Justice Department's Inspector General. Why can't they just get along? And who is right? I'm going to speak to a former Inspector General for the NSA about all of this next.
So, that goal you've been saving for, you can do it. We can do